Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this webinar, which is part of our Learning Network series webinars organized by YouthPower 2 Learning and Evaluation, or as we call it lovingly, YP2LE. So I'm Maria Brindelmeyer. I'm the Senior Knowledge Management Specialist for the YP2LE project, and I'm leading the Learning Network activities and the website activities for YP2LE. So for those of you who are still new to YP2LE, I just want to mention that this is a USAID funded project that is focused on positive youth development. And the Learning Network webinar series is a new series that we started in October with, we started with 3 sessions on systems mapping. And if you missed some of those sessions, we are recording them and you can always access them on our website. So our session today is organized together with our partner VSO International, and we are really excited to have them and present about their program and some recent research that they did. So talking about introductions, I would like to invite you all to introduce yourselves. And you can do that by going into the chat and just typing in the chat your name, your organization, and where you're joining us from. So please go to the chat and start typing. And in the meantime, I will just talk a little bit about positive youth development. So positive youth development, as USAID and our project is defining it, is that we are focused on programs that recognize that youth, in order to be successful, need to have assets. So that could be skills, that could be funding. They need to have the ability to leverage those assets, so have agency, and to have the ability to contribute to positive change for themselves and for their community. And a lot of that can only happen if they're also surrounded by an enabling environment that supports them. So those components are really the important elements behind all the programs that we are organizing, and the evidence also that we are gathering about positive youth development. So with this short introduction, I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues from VSO, and I'm handing it over to Anne. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you very much, Maria, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and I hope you can hear me loud and clear. So my name is Anne Kahuria, and I'm the Global Youth Engagement Officer for VSO International, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'll be the moderator for the webinar. So once again, thank you all for joining, and the call will run for 1.5 hours. And kindly feel free to introduce yourself. As Maria mentioned, you can just share your name and the organization you're representing. So before I go into the background for this webinar, I would like to invite Cole just to share a bit more around the guidance on using Zoom. Cole?
Hi, thanks, Anne. So welcome, everybody. Just a quick bit of background for everyone joining this morning or this evening or this afternoon, wherever you are. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions towards our presenters, and to reach out to anyone else running the webinar, such as myself. If you have any trouble, please reach out to me directly. Please make sure to keep your cameras off and your mics muted as we go through the webinar. We will also be going into breakout sessions later in the webinar where you'll be able to turn on your cameras and have facilitated discussions. So if you are eager to chat, that is the place to do it. We will also be utilizing Padlet in these breakout sessions. So you'll be asked to click on a link to add information to just a kind of a whiteboard during these facilitated breakout sessions. So once again, welcome everybody. If you do have any questions, please direct them at me. My name is Cole. And in the meantime, enjoy the presentation. Thanks. Back to you, Anne.
Thank you. So just to give you a background, so VSO International is a member of the YouthPower Learning and Evaluation Consortium. And we're excited to host this webinar titled Building Communities Resilience Through Youth Volunteer Networks. And as you're all aware, the world has changed a lot in the past months with the emergence of COVID-19, which has had unprecedented impact on people's lives across the world. And as part of our response in VSO International, we supported youth volunteers to quickly pivot their actions and also engage in response and recovery plans by creating collaborations with key stakeholders. We also did conduct two rapid researches to understand the effect of the pandemic on youth individual lives, and this is really more on their personal journey and to also influence youth programming or interventions. The other key reason was to capture key learnings from the youth networks to understand their motivation and factors that enable their proactive response. So through this webinar, we hope to share with you the findings from the two from the two researches, and we're going to focus more on the importance of youth volunteering networks and related benefits. The other key thing we would want to do is to showcase how the evidence and the learning coming from the research links to the positive youth development framework that Maria has just shared during the introduction. And we'll also promote youth volunteering as an effective pathway for youth engagement, program delivery and advocacy, as well as promoting volunteering for development approach or people-centered approach in development. So I'll briefly just take you through the session's flow and the plan. And we'll start off with an overview about VSO, and then we'll go into the research findings and the learnings, which is going to be shared through a presentation. And then we'll have two youth speakers who are going to be sharing the experiences and more so around COVID response, and also sharing more around the recommendation, initially as young people, for them to be proactive in development, initially around this COVID response. And after that, we'll have a session where we'll be able to go into breakout sessions through which all the participants will be able to share and learn from each other. And then we'll have a plenary session where we'll share the key highlights emerging from the breakout sessions and plus the key trends as well. And then finally, we'll have keynote messages from YouthPower Learning and Evaluation, as well as from VSO International. Again, most welcome to the call, and feel free to share any comments or questions that you might have on the chat. So to start us off, I'm gonna invite Charlene, who's the head of engagement and partnership, who's gonna share with us an overview about VSO. So thank you and most welcome, Charlene.
Thank you so much, Anne. I'm going to just share my screen. Just let me know when it's there.
Yes, we can see the screen.
You can see the screen?
Yes.
Great. So thanks everyone. And again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So as you can see on this slide, this speaks directly to the vision of VSO International, which is a fair world for everyone. And we essentially do this by creating lasting change through volunteering. So essentially, I think the main purpose of presenting this is to underscore the fact that for VSO, it's really volunteering and volunteering for development, which is really at the core of our approach to development, which focuses on a range of different pathways, which I'll speak about in this presentation. So these are the essential values of the organization, and VSO took a lot of time and a consultative, collaborative process to arrive at these values. These underpin everything that the organization does. So the four values are really collaboration, knowledge, inclusion, and integrity. For us, so it's really important that everything that we do is collaborative, and that if you look at it from an external perspective, that really means for us to collaborate and work very closely with poor and marginalized people. So we don't do anything unless we very extensively consult people externally. So that's something that is very fundamental to the way we approach developing projects and initiatives. Very closely linked to this is the aspect of inclusion, which ensures that there is diversity and equality throughout the work that we do as an organization, and also that we ensure that those who have been denied choice and opportunity, those who are most marginalized, are actually the ones who are able to stand for themselves and able to advocate for those themselves. And that's something that we follow the entire sort of process of the program cycles that we develop. We are very evidence focused, so knowledge is a very important value for us. We ensure that there is strong evidence and insight which backs both the development of our programs as well as the delivery. And finally, integrity, which is to treat others with respect and treat them as equals. Also to commit to safeguarding. We take a zero tolerance approach to abuse and harm. So this is something which is right at the center of everything that we do. So just to give a very brief snapshot, in the last 60 years, VSO has been working in 90 countries. We have worked with more than 80,000 volunteers and supported over 15 million people. So we come from a very strong background of knowledge and experience on volunteering for development. Have implemented programs like you can see in terms of our approach to development and how VSO is actually looking at doing development differently. This goes back to the first slide, but essentially, as all of us know, VSO focuses on volunteering for development as volunteering for development as a very core part of our offering and our model. And that also includes working extensively with local community organizations and national governments, really bringing people together to coordinate collective action. So this whole approach of collective action and collaboration is something that underpins everything that VSO does. And as part of that, we do recognize young people and youth as equal partners in development. That's very much a part of our philosophy and approach as an organization. And we support their active engagement throughout the program cycle and as part of our leadership work, which is also something that I'll touch upon a little bit later in the presentation. So this is something that we talk a lot about. Primary actors are really the people and the communities that we work with, and we do not call them beneficiaries or people who are simply because we believe that as per our entire strategy of collaboration and inclusion agency, that the primary actors actually are the ones who need to stand for themselves. And that's the reason that we engage them at every point, particularly at the time of even designing programs, listening to what the needs of the community are, and working with them and with our volunteers to design programs towards a fairer world. And just to mention, that's almost 70% or over 70% of our primary actors are young people or youth. So this is something. So youth population, and this is true for us historically. So it's not something which is new, but something that VSO has been investing in for many, many years and decades, that a very large percentage of people who we work with are young people. This is just a very brief snapshot of our volunteering for development model. And I won't get into the details of this, but essentially we place primary actors who are, the communities that we work with right at the center of the development model. And as part of engagement with and through primary actors, we engage with local communities and youth volunteers in particular who then work closely with local and global experts to design and deliver programs. Inclusion and gender, resilience and accountability is something which is very central to what VSO does. And also we focus on building sustainable local NGOs, private sector and youth organization partners to create a sense of ownership and sustainability for our programs. Approaches which I just mentioned of social accountability, resilience, social inclusion, and gender are absolutely fundamental to all our programs, to the design and delivery of all our programs. And essentially, when we work with communities, we are trying to create greater accountability within the local systems where we work, a greater resilience for the primary actors to shocks and stresses, and also to ensure there is inclusion in every sense of the word, and that issues related to gender are taken care of in every program. This is very briefly our key principles of our programming approach. So every program that we design has elements of accountability. It has to be people-centered, evidence-based, effective and appropriate. We ensure collaboration and knowledge sharing, and also very central to the people first programming principles and approach, and something that we follow throughout our program design cycle. The relational volunteering methodology is something which is very central to how we design programs, because volunteering for development is at the heart. It's actually a sort of a fairly complex methodology that we've developed over the years. So I won't get into details, but includes elements of inspiration, inclusion, innovation, collaboration, these various attributes of volunteers, and volunteering is something that we design right into our programs. Specifically, we look at youth engagement. So young people, like I said, are a very integral part of the way VSO designs and delivers programs. So one of the things, so there are three elements to this. We look at the engagement of young people first in our programming, like I mentioned, our youth. So we have programs in the areas of education, health, livelihood, and also initiatives in the area of safe, peaceful, and resilient community building. And in each of these areas, young people are at the center of the work that we do, and the primary actors that we work very closely with. We also look at young people as volunteers. So youth volunteering is a very integral part of our work as well. And we look at young people and youth volunteers as change agents in their respective communities and domains in which they work. And finally, we also look at engagement and leadership of young people through active citizenship, so that they are delivering not only to for the successful implementation of the various programs which they are working, but also towards the broader SDGs, and become part of leadership and policy conversations globally through this work. This is the youth success framework that we actually have developed based on our experience of working with young people and the evidence that we have, and is something that we designed right into our programs, and it includes of identifying the aspirations of young people, building their assets and capabilities, making sure they are equal partners and are part of all decisions, also contribute to social impact and innovation. That's something that we design into our program. So again, something that you'll probably hear a little more about later in the webinar, but this is essentially the framework that we use for designing the engagement of young people in our programs. And finally, very quickly on our youth networks. So what exactly are they? So youth networks are spaces that we've created in different countries where young people are able to come together, have a voice, and design and implement actions. These could be formal or informal, and they define their own priorities and focus. So there's a lot of focus on young people's sort of self-agency in terms of designing and delivering programs through the networks. VSO's role is really supporting in the establishment of the networks, in the capacity building, and training of the networks, to ensure that there are the right partnerships in place with other organizations, so that there is greater collaboration and scale at which we work, and also to promote volunteering as a pathway for our engagement and development work more broadly. Finally, in terms of the actual actions, there are several things that we engage with young people to achieve, including accountability actions, peace and resilience building, participatory action, through research and evidence generation, advocacy, and various innovative initiatives. Several of them that we've developed in as part of the COVID response, which is again something that you'll hear later in the presentation. So I'm going to stop here, and I think I'm passing back to you, Anne.
Yes. So yeah, thank you very much, Charlene, for sharing an overview about VSO to the participants. And I believe we all now have a understanding about VSO International, the work we do, and of course, our youth engagement approach. So at this point, I would like to invite Susina, who's our Global Youth Engagement Manager, to share the key learnings and findings from the 2 researches conducted by VSO. And this is in relation to the impact of COVID on young people's lives and also the youth network responses. So welcome, Susina.
Thank you, Anne. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think Anne has covered highlights of the research that we have conducted. Just to reemphasize that the first research focused on youth as individuals and aimed to understand how youth were being impacted by the pandemic itself, as we wanted to listen to their voices and perspectives. The second research was to further how our youth networks were able to pivot quickly and digest to the external environment, which led to their active engagement that we had seen. I will first take you through the research on the impact of COVID-19 on young people. As you can see, the approach we used in this research was story gathering approach. And youth were asked to narrate their responses freely to allow them to express their views. We used online tools to collect the data and complemented it with phone interviews or paper-based responses wherever the situation was too difficult to allow digital means. We had a fair representation, a little bit larger for boys, but fair in general in terms of gender. And we did cover rural, semi-urban, and urban communities, which also reflects our reach in programming. 95% of our respondents were youth between the age 18 to 29. Actually, about 55 of them were under 24. After collecting about 300 stories at the end, we were able to analyze 262 data coming from 17 countries. The research questions were framed around three areas in general. The first one was the impact that the pandemic had on youth themselves, their families, and their communities. The second was on response actions youth were taking at that time and related challenges. And the last one was to capture their suggestions and recommendations on how to better be prepared for such a context in the future. Overall, the research confirmed the significant level of impact COVID-19 had on youth and how, in some cases, their lives have been completely changed and collapsed in many ways. We tried to analyze the data in different themes, and 4 areas emerged strong, and the first one being livelihoods. On livelihoods, just to say that for youth, this was the highest area impacted. Of course, this also refers to the fact that most of the youth were above 18. But for many, it was not only a loss of income, but in many cases, a collapse of what they had. Some were facing hunger, eviction, stress, trauma. It was reflected from the evidence that some of the good government relief policy actions, like, for example, debt reliefs or other kind of support, we're not really reaching the most vulnerable groups. In relation to education, of course, they reported disruption in their learning, which was seen everywhere. But even more than that, we saw that the school and training institutions were providing more than education. They were providing safe spaces, especially for girls, and they were places that youth could access services, health services related especially with SRHR services. And for many young people, this meant that they were not able to access these services at all. In relation to health, in addition to the fear of catching the virus itself, most issues youth reported were related to poor or very limited access to SRHR services, anti-drugs, and also not even freely accessing health services in general. In some cases, they reported abuse by public health officers in many instances. In general, what we saw was the interlinkages between sectors and also the compounded vulnerabilities that youth were facing, because as you can see, one sector is very much interlinked with the other. The last area that came out strong was actually the disruption of social engagement and relationship and the compounded effect that everything had on these elements. Youth reported it to be very critical, actually, and even the data showed that youth have been more affected by loss of social networks than boys. What was interesting here is that for youth, it was not so much about the problem COVID-19 directly itself that was most challenging, but their inability to act and to respond to it, which is also related with agency, and also not being able to access the social support, the peer support, and generally the network they had previously that can help them cope up with the challenge. For example, university closure meant that some youth needed to go back to their families and they needed to reintegrate. In some cases, that was seen to be very difficult. Even they couldn't agree in what the pandemic was in itself and on the precaution measures with their families. In addition to their own personal experiences, we did ask youth to kind of identify other youth or other groups who were more vulnerable than themselves. And they did identify several of them, actually. Young girls and young mothers between the most, one of the most common ones. And they said that such communities, such groups were not able to help themselves nor their children, and they needed to support them in many instances. People with disabilities, elderly people with limited support, people living with HIV, and those with no skill alternatives were the ones they had identified affected severely. In terms of the actions, how youth have been responding, we categorized them in 3 areas. The first was around sensitization and awareness raising about COVID-19 itself, which was the highest area of action. This took place offline and online. The second one was around mitigating the impact of COVID-19 restrictions, supporting in different areas of needs for vulnerable groups. And the last one was around advocacy and voice. And I can say one thing about the advocacy element. It was usually around inclusion and accountability that was missing from government responses that they were advocating for. And the 3 areas represent VSO's country of operation. The pink one is Eastern Africa, and the dark blue one is Southern Africa, and the last, the light blue one is the Asia country offices we have in VSO. So their actions, like what was interesting was that 80% of young people actually reported engaging in one way or the other in response actions. And we asked them, you know, how are you responding? And it shows you the list or the areas that they have been acting, from reaching the most marginalized communities up to lobbying, advocating for those, and evidence generation. They did cover a lot range in terms of their response actions, and technology played an important role to play wider engagement opportunity. That was the platform they used, but it was not only dependent on technology. Overall, what we saw was that youth spearheaded inclusion, pivoted quickly to digital approach, and also prioritized immediate needs and really understood the relational aspect of their communities. We did ask them what their challenges were in the barriers for engagement. The most common cited challenges were lack of resources and support. This is to themselves, like lack of PPE protection materials or lack of materials to support the communities they identified. The second one was actually lack of opportunities or knowledge about engagement opportunities, and they continuously cited that they were not being welcomed, they were not called for, even when they asked for it, and government and other actors actually dismissed them in many circumstances. As you can see from the example in Thailand and Malawi, they were a little bit unhappy about the responses. It has also, it is related to the social norms, in some cases, how government sees youth, and so on. And just here to emphasize that the enabling environment, lack of enabling environment was the bigger barriers they cited overall. Of course, there were other challenges related to their own fear and readiness, lack of readiness to engage, and also some of the restrictions by government were prohibiting for engagement other than the online elements. They did have a lot of suggestions actually, but a few of them were quite interesting. Like they wanted youth, for example, to be seen as possible victims of the pandemic, but at the same time as agents of change. They saw themselves as key actors that can effectively work with key stakeholders to reduce the impact of such crisis, which was not the case at that moment. And as you can see, they also recommended for immediate needs related with survival to be prioritized, both in policy and response actions. Social protection measures were also the ones that they recommended. So I will go to the second research now. This research focused more around the youth networks as a group. The previous one were their own individual experiences and stories. This one focused on youth networks and their responses. The research process followed a rapid research approach because it was done at the earliest stage of the pandemic and restrictions were the highest, and even further engagement was not able to take place. We conducted research because we saw that young people in our networks were already responding and wanted to understand more about what was the factor for their quick actions in pivoting towards the external context in their needs to the communities. So we followed a rapid online research. We collected data through social media groups, and also sensitization materials were shared, and in some cases chatted over phone interviews. We sampled out few countries to take a more qualitative and in-depth data to represent our youth networks across the several countries we work with. The research questions were framed in 5 areas around the impact, around the action, the approach they followed, the challenge they were facing, and the suggestion they have. So it's kind of similar with the first one, except that these were more focused on the approach they used, and also in terms of the challenge and actions, we did try to understand better from their action in itself, what were the approach they were following, what helped them, and so on. So I will not talk about the impacts because it's kind of similar with the finding of the first one, but in terms of the action, it was also, again, similar. It's focused on sensitization, mitigation, and also advocacy. But we saw a range of work that the youth were doing across the different countries of that VSO operates. They provided, protection materials like the tippy-taps, as you can see, to schools, health services in remote and rural areas, and supported their communities to continue their education in some cases where the pandemic has been a little bit mild. They went door to door to provide information to those who are not getting the government information and provided sensitization and awareness raising support. They ensured that the government responses included those who are disabled, those living with HIV, those living alone. They advocated for the protection of girls and women from GBV, which was rising because of the pandemic. They advocated for inclusion of those young mothers, those who couldn't go out, and support their families, for governments to pay attention to them. They did a lot of media engagement, awareness raising, social media campaigns, a lot. The range and their level of engagement intense. And I can say that VSO's impact reach during this season has almost tripled because of the youth engagement actions in different levels in different communities. So we did try to understand what were the enablers for these successes. Why are youth engaging so actively with all the challenges that they have been going through? And one thing that came out very strong was that they really appreciated the opportunity to act and make a difference in their own communities. And we identified 5 areas especially that supported them. The first being their assets. They are being empowered through different trainings that we have provided them, which because VSO follows the PYD, the Positive Youth Development Framework, we also follow the asset-based capacity building approach. We had trained them around social accountability, social inclusion, advocacy, and also around livelihood skills, soft skills, networking, and so on. That really helped them, and they cited that as supporting them to kind of use during this opportunity. And also they felt that they could contribute to the circumstances. The need to reach and stand for marginalized communities were very strong, and they understood how institutional systemic operations were limited in some cases. So they were very quick to make sure that their communities were left in one way or the other were reached through the government responses or other source responses. And the third was their ability to utilize and maximize from digital approach, which the pandemic has promoted in its own way. So that allowed them to have agency, even when the restrictions didn't allow them to go out. They did have that agency to use digital approach. At the same time, they also saw the value in the change that brought to many communities. Even they can reach different young people who can reach rural communities. So they saw that their actions can complement others who can move around in the cities, in the urban areas, and in the rural areas. They also wanted to continue their peer engagement. They wanted to support one another in this time of need. They felt that, the decision makers were not including them in many ways. They also decided to engage themselves and build their own resilience, which also helped in terms of reducing the psychosocial impacts. And innovation, what was interesting was from the research, we saw that the challenge pushed youth to innovate, to think differently, to come up with new solutions. That was also an enabler in its own sense. So they had the assets, they could see the contribution, and also it was a chance for them to do something differently, think differently, which was quite interesting. In terms of the challenge, in some cases, the situation itself was very, very difficult. Their family situation, different areas were challenging for them. And they were prohibited to engage further. In some cases, they were not welcome. In some cases, they were not socially accepted. In some cases, families didn't allow them because of safety and security reasons. And the other challenge they raised was that because they had limited engagement opportunities and platforms, they felt that the digital approach could actually exclude certain groups, even though they tried as much as possible to reach those who were highly marginalized. And also government kind of mass engagement did not reach the most marginalized. So they were fearing that they would compound the exclusion by engaging further digitally or using different ways of engaging in their own rights, and they wanted to complement their actions to be complemented. And also safety and security measures were also a challenging factor. Overall, as you can see, the lack of enabling environment was the biggest limitation in terms of their challenge. So what did we learn overall? The key thing that came out were youth networks were very effective in building communities' resilience. This is because they were able to factor in inclusion, they were able to build trust, they were able to recognize what their communities need, and they were able to produce solutions that were owned by their communities, even when government's response action failed and communities did not actually believe in government's message. They were able to believe and work with youth networks in many instances. We also saw that networks who were positioned well to engage or influence with decision makers, with duty bearers, were very effective, more effective in their engagement because they were able to influence government actions, stakeholders' actions to their own benefits. The other thing we learned was that government response plan did not take into consideration how youth volunteers could support. So this provided an opportunity for youth networks who were empowered, who already had assets and ability to act, to show themselves. This was one of the things that we learned. Governments didn't know where to start, how to start, even when they decided to engage youth. So in such a cases, youth networks provided a very good and attractive opportunity to support response action. And the other interesting factor that came out was that collaboration was the approach used by most youth networks. And even those networks who were known for advocacy earlier, before the pandemic, they quickly pivoted to collaborative actions. And the reason they gave was that we need to prioritize the needs of the community first, and we can argue for accountability measures later on. They just wanted to make sure that survival was the first and their list. In terms of their recommendation, youth clearly demanded recognition to the work they were doing, which was massive, to be honest, and which was evidenced from the research and from different external data as well. They said that we are doing a lot at a minimum. Government and stakeholders need to recognize that and also enhance their representation and support so that they can do even more. Understanding of the impact of COVID-19 on youth themselves, especially in their livelihoods, were an area of interest for youth. They said that we will act, we are resilient, we will innovate, but at the same time, stakeholder needs to make sure that our lives also are dependent on our incomes, and there needs to be very innovative scale-up approach by government and others to respond to their livelihood needs. They also saw an opportunity to amplify youth leadership actions. And they said that this pandemic has shown youth leadership to many who are very pessimistic around it. And they design and build a better future to recover from COVID-19 in general. That was their ambition overall. So just to kind of spark the discussion going forward, the overall conclusion that came out from the two research were that young people are making enormous contribution to the COVID-19 response. And this has to be recognized that they are doing so often under difficult circumstances. And also stakeholders need to do a lot in terms of promoting youth leadership and youth representation, especially in fragile and crisis situations. Holistic approach in programming is important, so we should be able to address the psychosocial elements, the livelihood, the health as much as possible. We need to embrace holistic approach in programming and not limited to a certain sector in our designs. Youth networks are also great opportunity for innovations and also community-owned solutions. And I want to emphasize here that their solutions were not only relevant to them, but also for program designers and actors, CSOs and other key stakeholders. And lack of enabling environment was the biggest challenge cited from both research, while assets, agency, and opportunity to contribute were the key enablers. I know it's a lot in a very short period, but I hope I have done justice to kind of translate the key message that the youth had in terms of the research and the outcome of the research. Thank you, Anne, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susina, for the great presentation on the findings and the key learnings from the two researches, which clearly evidences the critical roles that the young people have played in COVID response, and also not forgetting that they're also equally impacted negatively by the COVID. Thus, it's important to also consider their needs as primary actors and as active change agents in our programming as we get them. So it is also important for us to hear from young people. And at this point, I would really want to invite Mildred, who's going to support us in a conversation with two of our young people from our youth networks, who are going to be sharing their experiences, their actions, and even recommendations as regards what they've been doing when it links to COVID response. So thank you very much, and most welcome, Mildred.
Great. Great. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, Mildred.
Hello?
Hi, Mildred, we can hear you.
Great. Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you. I can hear.
Yes, we can hear you, Mildred. Mildred, can you hear me? Do you want to continue? Okay.
Yeah, you can continue. I can hear you loud and clear.
She often has a very bad connection, so I don't know if someone wants to jump in for her.
Okay. So yeah, I'll probably just jump in for Mildred. And thank you very much. We do have two young people. We have Tolani, who's a youth leader from Nigeria, from the National Youth Engagement Network. And you also do have Kenneth, who's the chair of the Youth for Sustainable Development Network in Kenya. So we'll just start with a conversation with Kenneth, which is really just looking at his experience as regards innovation, technology and inclusion elements and the environment. And Kenneth, as a youth leader and with other youth within your platform, how have you contributed in COVID response measures and initiatives?
Thank you very much, Anne, for this opportunity. And I would really love to share about what we've been doing in our network regarding addressing the COVID-19 measures. So when the COVID-19 pandemic came, we already had the platform, which is Youth for Sustainable Development Network here in Nairobi. And we used it as a platform to kickstart our initiatives around responding to the impacts of COVID-19 and even COVID-19 itself. We were able to just mobilize more youth to join the platform and bring on board even other organizations like Red Cross here in Kenya to conduct community activities such as distribution of personal protective equipment and conducting education around safe hand washing techniques. We also did a lot of awareness campaigns with the motorbike riders, the public motorbike riders, because they interact with the most number of people. They're one of the groups that are really highly vulnerable. So we were able to give them reflective materials or reflective jackets with key messages around COVID, just to help demystify some myths around COVID-19. We're also able to just engage in some road shows in the informal settlements here in Nairobi. And also we were able to use technology, just leverage using technology as an enabler, also to just be able to conduct some of our activities. So one example, or some examples of how we've used technology, we used community radios to raise awareness around COVID-19, to let people know how they can stay safe during the pandemic. And that even was able to reach over 1.5 million here in Nairobi's informal settlements. We used virtual platforms for meetings, such as the Zoom, Google Meets, Microsoft Teams, for example, to organize webinars and trainings to enhance youth knowledge on various issues. both primary issues and secondary issues as a result of COVID-19. And these things like sexual reproductive health, issues around gender-based violence, resilience, mental health, and even psychosocial support. There was also use of social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter to just conduct social media awareness campaigns, share blogs around trending topics during that time, and even raise awareness on some of the facts, statistics, just to demystify the myths around COVID-19. So the technology has actually enabled us to track even the impacts of our activities using the hashtags that we had. One hashtag was KE Volunteers Against COVID-19. And we were able to also just reach some of the most vulnerable people within Nairobi region. For example, we intentionally targeted the most vulnerable communities in the formal settlements because we looked at them as people who did not have as much opportunity and information as compared to the rest of the people. We even invited deaf participants to be part of our webinars and training just to capacity build them, and even provided sign language interpreters for them. We also just did some sensitization on disability inclusion to make sure that all efforts that are within the country are inclusive of persons with disabilities, just to ensure that they're involved in the process or in the activities around COVID-19 response.
Great. Thanks for that, Ken, and I'm really sorry for the technical hiccup. Perhaps maybe you could shed some light as a young person. What would you say are some of the biggest barriers that prevent young people from actively playing a role in COVID response or any other emergency kind of response? And on the flip side, what would you say are the enablers of this?
Thank you for that, Mildred. One of the main barriers that we have been able to face is ignorance of people, just on COVID-19 measures. When COVID-19 came, there was already disruption in terms of livelihoods, as you've seen even in the presentation earlier on the research. And when months go by, people tend to focus more on rebuilding their livelihoods and restoring whatever revenue streams that they had. So there is little adherence to COVID-19 measures, and that was a big barrier. On the other side, we were able to really do a lot of things because of involving other stakeholders and partners in the process. We involved the local administration through the sub-county commissioners. We had other community-based organizations join us in our initiatives, and even international NGOs. We had Red Cross, for example, being really part of our activities in the awareness campaigns, and even the local community radio stations, because they gave us the platform to be able to echo our youth voices and even raise awareness around COVID-19.
Thanks for that, Rama. And finally, just before I let you go, what actually would you say motivates young people to volunteer in such difficult situations?
I think the main motivating factor is that youth are really willing to be part of these initiatives. They're really willing to be at the center of bringing that impact in their communities. We've seen this with the role that the youth have played within our networks, for example. They have really shown that they have the capacity and the capability to be the drivers of change, especially in such critical times such as the COVID-19 pandemic period. And something that I really want to say just before you let me go is that there is need to provide a safe and inclusive platform for youth to engage and have their voices heard. This can be done through having a platform for them. Either we can look at what existing platforms are there to engage them, and if there are none, then we can also form platforms for them just to be able to engage, because working in such platforms is more efficient and also has more impact in the community. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot for that. Thanks a lot for that, Rama. And coming up next, I would just like to introduce to you Tolani Adebayo, who is one of our youth engagement leaders in Nigeria. Welcome, Tolani.
Thank you, Mildred.
Great. So Tolani, based on your opinion and the interactions with other young people in Nigeria, how has the pandemic impacted youth, and how have you as a youth network been able to respond to this?
Okay, thank you, Mildred. I'll start by saying that the pandemic has had a lot of impact on the youth, both positively and negatively. Positively, some youths have been able to switch to technology using social media to access information. Some were able to take some online courses to help in their careers and businesses. And also some were able to start up small businesses as they were able to focus on their untapped skills and talents. Negatively, I'll say the pandemic has affected social lives of many youths. Not everyone could keep up with social media networking, and some, I believe, have probably gone through depression at those period. Other impacts of the pandemic are unwanted pregnancies, increase in the rate of unemployment as there was a massive retrenchment of staff during the pandemic, which has led many youths into poverty, and some are right now struggling for survival. In Nigeria, what the Youth Network did in Nigeria during COVID-19 was an intervention program called Agent End Communal Spread of COVID-19. We carried out this project in 3 states in Nigeria, Kano, Adamawa, and Abuja states, reaching over 10 communities. As part of VSO's inclusion program, the intervention was targeted mainly at women and youths in those communities. So we visited the community and spoke to the leaders about what we intended doing. And one of the things we did was sensitization. Sensitization was done on the streets, reaching over 1,500 families to ensure that people had access to correct and complete information on COVID-19 and how to prevent it. As most people thought it was a hoax, while some thought it was a disease for the rich people. Also, engagement manuals and t-shirts with COVID-19 preventive messages were made as awareness and advocacy toolkits to remind people constantly of the need to adhere to COVID-19 preventive measures. We also selected 50 COVID-19 prevention ambassadors, mostly youths. They were able to champion street to street and marketplaces awareness, reaching over 2,200 households in their awareness. The Youth Network had also a disability inclusive response on the COVID-19, as awareness on COVID-19 in communities in Abuja, Nigeria, called for social protection of the poor and vulnerable groups and ensured that we need to include marginalized and vulnerable people in community engagement as vulnerable and high-risk groups. Can you hear me, Mildred?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So lastly,
so much for that.
Okay. Lastly, the youths were involved in social media engagements on television and radio awareness on COVID-19 preventive measures. This was done in indigenous languages, which enabled people to grasp the message clearly. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for that detailed interventions that you've shared with us that you've been taking up in Nigeria. Maybe just as we wind down, if you had a message that you could pass to either the youth actors or agencies or even government agencies in terms of how to meaningfully enhance engagement of young people in such pandemics, what would that message be?
Yeah, let me start with the youths. I would say that youth should participate in profitable tasks. They can take online courses that are related to such emergencies so as to know how to best respond in cases like COVID-19. Youth can also learn creative skills and start businesses in order to ameliorate the effects of such emergencies like COVID-19, as most youth had this COVID-19 had a lot of effect negatively on livelihoods. Now, to the government and agencies, I would say volunteering involving organizations and governments. They can make known to the public how youth can be engaged, provide resources, and let them know how best they can deliver. Also, more agencies should give room for more opportunities to youth, especially at the local level, as impact could be greater since they already understand their community terrain. They know how to act best in cases like such emergencies. Government should also create enabling environments for youth to thrive, such as policies that can allow them to have small clusters of education centers where they can learn activities, vocational skills, professional qualifications, etc., to help reduce the effect on their livelihood. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Tolani. I think we've learned a lot from what you and Rama are doing with the networks, both in Kenya and in Nigeria. I think we've gotten some very good insight in terms of how young people can really participate in terms of being strong advocates for awareness creation, but we've also learned that it's really important for us to invest in the platforms where we can have young people meaningfully engage, and that we also must be willing to resource this of engagement. And finally, I think we've also understood that young people are in fact the experts in their own realities, and it would be futile for us to run programming without engaging them. So thank you so much, Ken and Tolani, for those insights. I'll hand over back to you, Anne.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mildred, Kenneth and Tolani. Quite inspiring to hear from young people who are active change agents in their communities. And it's clear that the youth, young people are actually quite innovative, and they have had enormous contributions in their communities. And I think from here, and actually from also the learnings and findings that are emerging from the researches, as well as what the youth speakers have also shared based on the experiences and action and recommendations, we'd like to dive further on some of the key elements linked to positive youth development framework. I think you can see the linkages all through around the positive youth development framework, and also looking at the enablers and barriers for active youth engagement. We'd like to dive further on some of these key elements, and this is going to happen through breakout sessions that will go into all of us. We will go into 5 breakout sessions, which Kole is supporting us to get into those breakout sessions. And what you're going to be looking into as part of the key questions, I just want to give a highlight on what you're going to be focusing on. So for all the teams or the breakout sessions, we'll have one key question, common question, which is really going to be more on just a reflection from the presentations and also from the youth speakers and the conversation with the young people, Tolani and Kenneth. What resonates from the presentations and the insights further exploring needed? Do you see similarity or relevance in your current context? So it's just more of a reflection of what's emerging from the presentations as well as the youth voice. And then we'll have, as I mentioned, we'll have the 5 breakout sessions, and one of them will be on the assets and capabilities, which is really one of the core elements within the positive youth development framework. And we'll be looking at what assets we think are relevant or empowering for youth networks members. And then the other group will look at agency, which is how can we design youth volunteering programs that enhance youth agency and youth leadership. The third group will look at partnership and collaborations, and this is really more looking at volunteer networks in your context and how they're positioned to influence positive government actions that are youth responsive. And then the fourth one, we look at innovation, and I think you've clearly seen innovation also is emerging quite clearly from what has been shared. So how do we promote and support youth innovations in volunteering actions? That's going to be a question for the fourth breakout group. And the last one is going to be on safeguarding considerations. And this is looking at young people not only as active change agents, but also looking at their needs as young people. How do we balance our engagement with youth as primary actors? These more like the target beneficiaries themselves, and also youth as change agents or advocates in our programs. So you'll get more information about the key questions we'll be focusing on in the breakout sessions. So don't you worry so much about that. And as mentioned by Kole during the introductions, for these breakout sessions, we'll use Padlets, which will also be explained by our facilitators who will explain how to use the Padlets and to capture the notes from the Padlets. So with that, we're going to break out into the breakout sessions, and I will probably take about, in the interest of time, 15 minutes for the breakout sessions. And of course, we'll be recalled back into the main Zoom room or the plenary. Yeah. Call
Thank you.
over to you.
Yes, thank you, Anne. So if everyone could just hang tight for 1 minute, you'll see pop up on your screen in about 10 seconds, invitation to join the breakout room. And once you're in the breakout room, your facilitator will kind of explain the activities. So just hang tight for about 30 seconds and you'll move into your breakout rooms. Thanks, guys.
So I believe we have everyone back now.
Yep.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And I hope you had useful engagements during the breakout session. We do recognize that the timing could have been quite short to be able to dive quite deeper into the question, but I hope you're still able to engage and get some sharing and learning from each other. So as we wrap up the session, maybe it might just be good to hear if any of the participants have any general reflections. Anybody could actually just unmute and just share the reflections around the breakout session. Anyone? Okay, maybe as we wait for any volunteer as well, and in the interest of time, I think I'm going to ask the facilitators for each group to be able to just come back and share with us key reflection that emerged from the breakout sessions. And we can start maybe with the first breakout session, which was on assets and capabilities. Sorry, we'll start with the one on agency. And Mildred, do you want to share?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, so in our breakout, we were able to discuss basically what would we need to transition young people from being participants of engagements or initiatives to actually being the ones driving those initiatives. And one of the things that really came out strongly is that it's really important for us to create the space for young people to be able to do that. So this could be through platforms that allow them to exercise their voice. For example, VSO does this through volunteer platforms. Other initiatives could be doing this through platforms in education or whatever kind of programming that they're doing, but really creating the space that young people can own and be able to raise their voice. One of the other things that came through doing community service or youth-led community activities, so allowing young people to take leadership on issues that affect their own communities directly, so more of being an active citizen. So that also really came out strongly as one of the things that build young people's agency. And then some examples were given out in terms of the kinds of volunteering platforms that exist to just really shepherd young people into more of the leadership roles. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you very much, Mildred, for sharing what emerged from the... Yes, thank you, Mildred. And it's really clear in terms of course, for us to be able to build that agency or the ability for young people to make that change, they, of course, we need to also think about what they require. And it was clear from the group around the networks and the support they require as well. And of course, also building the whole element of volunteering also came in quite immensely on that. So we'll go to the partnership and collaborations. I'll hand it over to Maya or Susina.
Hi, Maya here. So we had some interesting discussions in the partnerships and collaboration group, and we talked about needing to engage more with the private sector and also sort of the government attitudes towards youth and ensuring that those opportunities are really given to youth networks to be able to utilize the assets that they have to hand, but are not always able to actually utilize and engage with. And we talked as well about sort of creating networks or creating awareness of youth networks within schools to kind of start the initial engagement with youth at that stage, with the hope that that would kind of continue beyond. Susina, I don't know if I've missed anything that you want to add.
Yeah, I think you have covered it all. Just to emphasize that also these, in some cases, governments were seen to support the youth network establishment, where in those cases, youth networks will have a better effectiveness, but it was limited to a certain country's experience. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susina and Maya, for sharing what came out from the partnership. And I think critical one was the one around the private sector engagement. And I think I'll hand over so to Shiny and Kenneth to share more around what emerged from the innovation breakout.
Thanks. Ken, did you want to go ahead and share as note taker? Are you happy to do that?
Yes, thank you. So with the innovations group, we had just asked about what, how can we promote and support youth innovations in volunteering actions, and what experiences do they have that they can share. And some of the participants were actually able to share about using the skills of the youths within the networks. So that is identifying the skills of each person within the network, identifying their capabilities and their interests, and channeling that to what they might be able to give the most output in. So if someone is good at maybe planning and organizing, if they're good at technical stuff, then they be engaged in such matters. That will help also with efficiency and achieving greater impact. There was also the aspect of using WhatsApp messages, so that's just social media platforms, to be able to reach the people in the online community. There's also the use of online, use of radios or the community radios in different regions, and even tailoring the messages, or when doing awareness campaigns, putting the messages in local languages. That also resonates well with the locals within that community. There was the part of working in sub-teams, or just like I said, which is decided by the existing skill sets. And the general conclusion was basically around you having a bigger impact through the networks, having the core team of youth volunteers who have the capacity to build through trainings, having online trainings for capacity development, just to enhance their knowledge on various aspects. And there was also bits of supporting or mobilizing more youth volunteers to be part of any existing networks, or even creating new networks where there is none. There was a question around the similarities in the interventions based on different contexts or geographical locations. And we would say that the awareness campaigns were a common thing, just that the approaches could be different. For example, in Kenya, we could use the motorbike riders to sensitize and reach more people because they interact with more people on a daily basis, while Nigeria did not use that approach. In the other hand, there was a lot of similarities in like tailoring the messages to the local context, the local languages. And so there was a lot of similarities and just bits of differences, just with the aspect of approach taken. Thank you. Is there something
Kenneth.
maybe you want to add, Shaini?
Thanks. I think that was everything. There was one point around this holistic approach to supporting youth volunteers through networks. So making sure that that core team of volunteers are actually having their resilience built, capacity building, wellbeing sessions for themselves, whilst they're actually supporting communities and other youth volunteers. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shaini and Kenneth, for sharing that in depth. And I think really it's clear that innovation is beyond technology. It's more than technology, using offline and online platforms. And thank you for that. And we'll give it to Tolani to share what emerged from the assets and capabilities. Kindly, Tolani, you can just summarize in a minute what emerged from assets and capabilities.
Thank you. From our group, we had a discussion around financial assets and also social assets. So people said having strong support system, networking and creative collaborations is really a strong asset that was able to help youth network respond in this period. And youth were also able to mobilize resources to help in this period, which was financial assets too, and also building resilience. Most youth, because of what we've gone through and the resilience that we have, it's really a strong capability in responding. It helped in responding to COVID-19 period. And more around the networking, supporting system, peer-to-peer support approach. So it's mostly social assets financial assets, and intellectual capacity. I don't know if Han has anything to add to.
Thank you, Tolani. Anything to add, Anne, on that?
No, well covered. Just that there was a multiple different types of assets that were really, at play and necessary for young people to action.
Thank you very much. And I think that speaks really to, I think you've really divided them quite well, the financial and also social assets. And I know there was a question also on the chat around how do you build youth resilience? And those are some of the elements that are actually enabling that resilience to build that resilience for young people. In the interest of time, and maybe just to mention, there are technical challenges on the safeguarding session. So we're not able to share much from the safeguarding session, but we'll keep the Padlets open for participants. If you have anything that you'd want to input for any of those sessions, feel free to add your inputs into the Padlets as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, the facilitators, for wonderful facilitation, and participants for their wonderful engagement. So at this point, I know we're already over time. Kindly just allow us to probably extend by only 2 minutes to wrap up. And I'm going to ask Maria from, sorry. Yes, we're going to have closing remarks at this point. And we'll start it off from Maria from YouthPower to learning and evaluation. Maria?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for sticking with us. I know we're running over a little bit, but this was really interesting to see all the feedback from the different groups. So just 1 minute to close everything off. Please join. Please join on youthpower.org and post resources and events. You can register there. You will get an update about events like today. Join the communities of practice. There's particularly one about youth engagement, and so you may find that very useful. And if you're a young change maker, join youthlead.org. If you haven't already, we have newsletters both for YouthPower and YouthLead, so do subscribe to those. And on the next page, just how you get into the learning network. You register at the top of the page, and then under communities on youthpower.org, you see the different communities of practice that you can join. And under all discussion groups, you will see there is one for the whole community. So do join. We hope to see you on a future event. And thank you so much for our VSO team. This has been really fabulous, very rich, and lots of inspiration. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for those closing remarks. I don't know, Susina, you had anything to say?
Yes, just to say thank you for everyone, and informing them that we will be uploading the starters kit around youth volunteering after the new year, just to watch that space on the platform. And thank you, YouthPower, to Learning and Evaluation Consortium and the actors within that space for providing this opportunity to share our learning and knowledge in this regard. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. So at this juncture, we've come to the end of the webinar. And just to say again from my end, thank you so much. And also on behalf of VSO, thank you so much for your active engagement. We also do want to appreciate all the facilitators as well. Thank you, and do appreciate all of you. So thank you, and do have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good holiday season.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.